Welcome to AP World History Modern Podcast. I'm Mr. Cruz. This is for topic 6.1. These are some big themes that we're going to be dealing with for the rest of the class. We talked about communism, socialism, capitalism. We talked and listened to an interview with Ayn Rand, author of Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead, her take on capitalism versus communism. We listened and watched a speech from Che Guevara, his take on capitalism and communism. And, we got a moderate view. We listened to some Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson. Ultimately, you're going to decide what your opinion is. As long as you have an informed opinion, we're doing our job. But these are big topics. And it's going to kind of go into what we're talking about in this topic. There's going to be a little sociology, some psychology, some cultural anthropology in here to try to understand these isms that people are buying into. And you're going to see the winners and losers of imperialism and capitalism. Okay, let's get some of these terms down. Okay, our central question for topic 6.1. What ideologies contributed to the development of imperialism between 1750 and 1900? So always keep that essential question in mind. By the end of the podcast, you should be able to answer it. Okay, if you remember last year when we studied World War I and World War II, nationalism. Nationalism can be very dangerous. Your textbook definition is, and I don't know if this came from AMSCO or not, ideology based on the premise that the individual's loyalty and devotion to the nation state surpass other individual or group interests. It's one thing to be patriotic. Like I come from a patriotic family, military family. But patriotism is not the same as nationalism. Nationalism can become very dangerous. That last part where our country's the best, our country's great, and we just happen to be better than anybody else. When you start buying into that, and what you're going to see in this topic, and for the rest of the year, you're going to see where my country is the best country, my people are the best people, my race is the best race. There's 500 religions in the world. Oh, but of course, mine's the best one. And now you're creating a very dangerous scenario. Now you can justify doing horrible things to other people. Not to get too much out of the discipline of history, but you can create a sense of other. When you create a sense of other, sometimes called otherness, you can justify doing horrible things to other people just because they're different than you, and you take their differences. Instead of celebrating cultural differences, you look down on it, that, you're superior. So this is a theme you're going to have to keep using, and this is really good stuff for a DBQ, for contextualization, evidence beyond the document. Okay, another ism is imperialism. Now, nationalism is an ingredient of imperialism. Imperialism, a standard and academic definition, is the policy, practice, or advocacy of extending the power and dominion of a nation, especially by direct territorial acquisitions or by gaining indirect control over the political or economic life of other areas. Okay, what the heck does that mean in plain English? Because of nationalism, and within this concept of nationalism, in this concept of otherness, you're going to see the ingredients here. It's racism, it's xenophobia, it's narcissism. And imperialism is going to be where we're going to subjugate your country because we are more advanced than your country as far as, industry goes, technology. This is one thing the Industrial Revolution did. Countries that were on the Industrial Revolution train, no pun intended, and that were getting these technological advances, they're going to get an upper hand on these countries. And the countries that are benefiting from the Industrial Revolution, these big economies, remember we talked about the two big economies they're going to develop. We talked about this, I think, in the last topic. I think in 5.10. It was the U.S. and Europe. So because of that, you're going to get into this might makes right. And this is where you're going to get into the haves and the have-nots. The Industrial Revolution is going to create a pecking order with these countries. And these smaller countries that are not as advanced now technologically, they're going to come under the thumb of these bigger economies. This is where you get, a Che Guevara going to Latin America and seeing people being exploited. And they're working so hard and they're very, very poor. He's going to blame capitalism. These people are on the wrong side of capitalism. So, communism doesn't work, but you can see where Che Guevara is coming from. And with Ayn Rand, you can see why Ayn Rand absolutely despised communism. She was a Russian Jew. Her family's business was nationalized by the Soviet Union when the Bolsheviks came in. Of course she despises communism. She saw the horrors of the Soviet Union, and she came to America. Of course she's a champion for capitalism. It's going to be, what side are you on? But this imperialism is going to present a problem because you have people, right? Again, there's 500 religions in the world, whatever. And of course, everybody thinks theirs is the right one. So that poses a dilemma, right? Not everybody can be right. Maybe they can, who knows? But people think, well, obviously I'm the best, right? I touched on this topic in class on Friday. Social Darwinism. Make sure you're aware of this. I'll read you a standard academic definition. The theory that human groups and races are subject to the same laws of natural selection as Charles Darwin perceived in plants and animals in nature. According to the theory, which was popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the weak were diminished and their culture delimited while the strong grew in power and cultural influence over the weak. Social Darwinists held that the life of humans in society was a struggle for existence, ruled by survival of the fittest. Now, when I say survival of the fittest, that term is coined often in history. Who's the first person you think of? Unfortunately, most people think of Darwin. That's a total myth. Please make sure you don't buy into that. Darwin never used the phrase survival of the fittest, even though it's associated with origin of species. That's not true at all. That term became famous by a philosopher. He's a philosopher, he's a scientist, not a biologist. I don't believe he was a biologist. It was a guy named Herbert Spencer. I don't think he was a biologist. Darwin was a biologist. But it's incredible how often it's wrongly attributed to Darwin. Darwin did not coin that phrase. But social Darwinism, it's going to be very convenient, right? Anytime you're dealing with racism or xenophobia, there's going to be convenient theories that are completely unproven that people are going to use to justify their horrible actions. Social Darwinism it's really scary stuff. And just to let you know, like, what kind of a guy Spencer was. Okay, Spencer, this is a quote. He gave an example. He said that poverty is this is what we're talking about in class Friday when I said, what would you say to somebody that told you poor people are poor because they're stupid and lazy? And we got some interesting comments from the class I thought were pretty funny. But this is like the completely racist attitude you're dealing with here. He felt that poverty was the result of a natural inferiority. You're poor because you're inferior. You're naturally inferior. Wrap your brain around it. That's totally insane. There's no science to back this up. And just to clarify, social Darwinism is total bunk. It's not accepted in any scientific circle. It's laughable. It's just like a free pass to take over other people. So that's the mindset. And Spencer, he gave an example. He said a young woman from upstate New York named Margaret, whom he described as a gutter child, because government aid had kept her alive. Margaret had, as Spencer wrote, proved to be the prolific mother of 200 descendants who were idiots, imbeciles, drunkards, lunatics, paupers, and prostitutes. Spencer concludes by asking, was it kindness or cruelty which generation after generation enabled these to multiply and become an increasing curse to the society around them? This is what people are buying into, these European countries, unfortunately, at times the American government, U.S. government as well. This is their justification, which is based on nothing. And if you don't believe me, Google it. Social Darwinism is laughable in scientific circles. It's founded on nothing but just racism and xenophobia. But whether it's consciously or subconsciously, here's where it comes in handy for the imperialists, the people that are going to take control of these smaller countries and put them, in a role to where they only exist to take care of the mother country, where the mother country is going to benefit economically. If someone steals from you, if someone rips apart your culture, your history, if they murder and rape your people, those are criminal acts. You go to jail. So they need something to justify what they're going to do. This justifies. It's like, no, we're going to help these people in their mind. And this goes back to Columbus, Hernan Cortez. We're going to teach them our religion, so we're saving their souls. And in the meantime, we're going to take their gold, we're going to take their natural resources, we're going to rape them, and we're going to murder them. So, you got to understand where this is coming from. This is a conscious or subconscious justification for these horrific actions and what they're going to do to these poor people. So just because you had some beautiful cultures that just because they're not as technologically advanced, they no longer matter. You're inferior because you don't have the technology we have. This goes on and sparks. I don't know if you're familiar with the eugenics. Google eugenics. It's very scary stuff. Eugenics was unbelievably still around up until 1970s when I was born. So it's unbelievable. There was eugenic sterilizations where they actually they disproportionately targeted women, minorities, and immigrants that were considered, to fit this feeble-minded, unfit part of society. So that's what you're dealing with to justify imperialism, okay? And so all imperialism is made up of different ingredients. Think of it like, nationalism is based on racism, xenophobia. So keep these terms in mind. And again, I know we're kind of getting down a rabbit hole here with some psychology and sociology and biology, but it's good to have this background. Topic number 1 from the AMSCO text, nationalist motives for imperialism. Our main idea for this topic. In Western Europe, revolutions, the rise of nationalism, and the creation of nation states characterized much of the 1800s. That's the main idea of this topic. 3 takeaways from this topic. If you're taking notes, please have topic number 1, nationalist motives for imperialism. I gave you the main idea. Now write down 3 takeaways. We'll try to have your notes nice and organized here. 3 takeaways from this topic. Once you buy into nationalism, you can condone asserting authority over other territories, right? For reasons we talked about at the beginning of the podcast. I'm better than you because I have a more technologically advanced society than you. Number 2, building an empire in Asia or Africa was one way for a country to assert its national identity in the global arena. So it's like, it's a status symbol. It's good for your economy. You're not a true superpower if you don't have some colonies here. Okay, number 3, Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, and the Netherlands would long possess overseas colonies. Colonization makes them richer and exploits the people they're colonizing. Okay, here's a subtopic. So if you're taking notes, European nationalism. Okay, let's talk about Britain for a minute. European nationalism is focused on Britain. After losing its American colonies, Britain looked for new lands to open a settlement. In 1788, the colony of New South Wales on the east side of island continent of New Holland, they took control of India from the East India Company, which we're going to talk about more later in the podcast. And by 1857, Britain controlled the entire Indian subcontinent. So it's the crown jewel of the British Empire, like we've talked about before. And they're getting into like Burma and Southeast Asia is under British control. Okay, so that's Britain. Now let's go to France. All right, France, underline it. Algeria in northern Africa and other islands in the South Pacific, like Senegal and Western Africa and Indochina and Southeast Asia. France is getting colonies in there. Italy and Germany were newly unified states in the late 19th century. And we'll hear more about that unification in the 20th century, right? Each wanted colonies not only for economic and strategic reasons, but also for prestige, right? You know, these other countries have these toys, these colonies. You need some too. But Germany and Italy are late to the party. They don't really begin acquiring like any type of an empire until the mid-1880s. Okay, let's go to Spain. Okay, so right, Spain, underline it. Spain led the quest for colonies in the first wave of imperialism during the 16th and 17th century. Its power was greatly diminished by the 19th century. It did not play a dominant role in the second wave of imperialism. So make sure you know that if you ever get a DBQ on this subject. You know, clarify and specify. 16th, 17th century, Spain's a major player in imperialism. 19th century, not so much. Okay, let's go over to Japan. So write Japan, underline it. Japan asserted its nationalist pride through incursions into Korea. China had a presence in Korea for years. This led to the Sino-Japanese War. Japan's victory in that war gave it control of Korea. And Japan also seized Taiwan. That's still an issue today, actually. So there's some countries, there's what they're doing. Everyone's trying to get their own colonies their own way. And the commonality is this feeling of nationalism, right? Again, and when I say nationalism, the ingredients, right? Racism, xenophobia. All right. As you know, might makes right. Topic number 2. Cultural and religious motives for imperialism. So underline that. So, you know, besides exploiting you to make a ton of money, this is going to be our caveat where we can kind of sleep at night because we're really just kind of, you know, taking over your country and for our personal benefit. The main idea of this topic, if you want to write main idea or big idea, whatever you want to call it, colonizers referred to colonized peoples as children. They saw themselves as protectors. Quote, civilizing mission rather than invaders. That's very important to understand. Throughout history, if you're in a country that's about to be civilized, you're about to get your gold, your raw materials, anything of value is about to get stolen from you. And rape and murder are going to be right behind that. That's, you know, historically defensible claim, as they say. Check it out. Check out Cortez. Check out Columbus. And what we're talking about here. We're going to civilize you because guess what? You're not like us. You know, one beautiful thing about where we are, one thing I always liked about Southwest Detroit, just on my block alone, if we had a block party, we looked like it looked like a picnic for the United Nations. I mean, we had people from all over the world. Detroit in the 1970s, 50s, 60s, 70s, even the 40s. I mean, you had people from all over the world here. We celebrated that. You know, my favorite part was sharing food, learning, you know, the first time I had a pierogi from a Polish family, I thought was amazing. This is different. They're not looking at cultures like, oh, that's cool, you're from a different culture. It's like, oh, you're different? Well, you're beneath me, right? You're like a child. so I need to civilize you. And the irony is, look up the definition of civilized and then watch what they do. What they do is anything but civilized, right? And your AMSCO text does a pretty good job. I mean, this textbook is what it is, right? It's helping us pass the test, right? This isn't a history book that kind of pulls on the heartstrings usually or gets too deep on any topic. It's more just facts and facts. But they actually had a good passage, especially for the AMSCO text, on page 368. Racial ideologies and the misuse of science. Just to kind of give you the book, I'm not just over here standing on my soapbox making stuff up. The attitudes of whites towards others were a form of racism. Colonial powers generally believed that they were inherently superior to those they subjugated. Pseudoscience is people who present theories as science that are actually incompatible with the scientific method, strengthened these attitudes. They claimed to have proof of the intellectual and physical inferiority of non-white races. Phrenologists, people who studied skull sizes and shapes, believed that a smaller skull size proved the mental feebleness of Africans, indigenous Americans, and Asians. These ideas have been proven false. So that's right out of the AMSCO book. I thought that was pretty well written. But as much you have scientific, it doesn't pass the mustard, right? You have everything supporting why this is horribly wrong, but it's still happening because why? Because they can do it. Because they're stronger, right? From a military standpoint and an industrial standpoint. The Industrial Revolution is turning these countries into bullies because they can be bullies, right? Our next subtopic here, we're still under topic 2. So if you're taking your notes, topic 2 is cultural and religious motives for imperialism. Here's a subtopic, cultural ideologies. Based on technological superiority over indigenous societies, colonial powers felt justified in superimposing aspects of their own culture on their colonies. Oh, you're not like my culture? Well, let me fix that for you. Everything you believe is wrong. It's ridiculous. You're a child. They use words like savages. You're a savage. You have to do things our way because, everybody knows our way's the best. Congregationalist minister Josiah Strong wrote in 1855, "Is there room," it's a quote, "is there room for reasonable doubt that the Anglo-Saxon race is destined to dispossess many weaker races, assimilate others, and mold the remainder until in a very true and important sense it has Anglo-Saxonized mankind." End quote. Who does that sound like? What does that sound like? You've heard that before. So this is just crazy town, how they're justifying what they're doing to these countries. Okay. And don't think this isn't still a thing. There's plenty of countries that are being exploited by countries with bigger economies to this day, right? Okay, the next subtopic here, Christianize and civilize. Some missionaries, and again, anytime, you can never say all missionaries are this. All such and such people are this. Anytime you make a generalization, it's going to be false, right? No entire group is one thing. There was some good things going on. David Livingstone, the AMSCO text talks about this, that he worked in sub-Saharan Africa and he tried to end the illegal slave trade. So there were some people trying to do some good things here. So it You know, we got to be careful. You can become what you hate, right? If you don't look at all sides. Okay, topic number 3, economic motives for imperialism. Topic number 3. If you're taking notes, write that down, underline it. So the big idea from topic number 3. Seeking ways to maximize profits, companies chartered by the British, French, and Dutch governments signed commercial treaties with local rulers in India, East Africa, and the East Indies. There's 3 major takeaways from this topic that I pulled out here for you. Number 1, these treaties gave the Europeans the right to establish trading posts and forts to protect their interest. 2, many companies had quasi-governmental powers, raising armies and conquering territory to form colonies. Number 3, as the Industrial Revolution transformed European economies, the desire for the sources of raw materials and markets for manufactured goods provided by colonies enticed imperial powers to increase their expansion. So those are 3 big takeaways from topic number 3. Again, topic number 3 is economic motives for imperialism. Right? And it's always about the money. Here's a cause and effect I want you to take away from this topic. As the Industrial Revolution, here's the cause. As the Industrial Revolution transformed European economies, high demand for manufactured goods and raw materials came into place. Now there's a high demand for manufactured goods. To make these manufactured goods, you need raw materials. The countries that they're exploiting have a lot of these raw materials. What's the effect? Imperial powers are now incentivized to increase expansion. So they have an economic incentivization towards greater expansion with imperialism, adding more colonies. You know, you gotta feed the monkey, man, right? Like you gotta, you know, that thing's just, you can make all this money, you just keep going and going. And between the Industrial Revolution and, you know, you're talking capitalism here, the amount of money they can make is just endless, right? So you with all that money being made, you can see how you can kind of lose sight. Morality is going to take a back seat, you know, when you're talking this kind of money. And what starts happening is these bigger countries that are, you know, benefiting from the Industrial Revolution, they find themselves in competition with each other all of a sudden. And they're all trying to get things from imperialism. I kind of singled out 6 things. So if you're taking notes, these are the 6 things that these bigger countries are trying to get so they can make as much money as possible and have as much influence in the world. Here's the top 6. Number 1, they're trying to get the best resources. Number 2, they're trying to get control of markets. If you can control a market, the more money you can make. 3, obviously trade, right? They're trying to get as much trade going as possible. And 4, low wage labor. And you know, this is still an issue today. We have a presidential election coming up. This is still an issue. Low wage labor. If you can pay your workers poverty wages, you make more money, right? 5, access to markets. Now, it's not the same as number 2 there with control of markets. So you control some markets. You're not going to control all of them. So you want to control as many as you can, but you also need access to other markets to keep it going, right? Think of like the Silk Road. And 6, control of natural resources. How are you doing that? Colonization, imperialism. These other countries have the natural resources, not your country. So you take control over there. Now their natural resources become your natural resources. You know, the continent of Africa, the billions, if not trillions of dollars of natural resources in Africa, you know, it's really said Africa should be a very wealthy continent, you know. But this is what they're going after, and they start getting into competition with each other. Okay, we're going to move to a subtopic. The subtopic is the East India Company. So underline that. Here's the main idea of the East India Company. The English monarch granted the East India Company a royal charter in 1600, giving it a monopoly on England's trade with India. So I made a list here that's easier for you to take your notes. The top 8 things you need to know about the East India Company. Number 1, after driving the Portuguese out of India, the company traded primarily in cotton, silk, indigo, and spices. Number 2, the company had private investors who used their own money to get it off the ground. Number 3, eventually the East India Company expanded its activities from the Persian Gulf to East Asia. Number 4, by the beginning of the 18th century, it had become the major agent of British imperialism in India. Number 5, after 1834, it became the British government's managing agency in India. Number 6, starting in 1620, the East India Company engaged in the slave trade. Number 7, during the 19th century, so you go from slaves to now you're going to become drug dealers. During the 19th century, it illegally exported opium to China in exchange for tea. And number 8, often referred to as the English East Indian Company, or after 1707, the British East India Company, to distinguish it from the Dutch East India Company, which we'll talk about in a second. But keep in mind how we opened up this podcast. The conscious or subconscious justifications of their actions, we're going to civilize these people. You're going to show them how to be civilized. You're engaged in the slave trade, the selling of other human beings against their will, and you're illegally dealing drugs to another country. That's civilized, right? So I can't hear what you're saying because your actions speak too loudly, right? Okay, the next subtopic. The Dutch East India Company. Here's the main idea. This is a quick one. In 1602, the Dutch government gave the Dutch East India Company a monopoly on trade between the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa and the Straits of Magellan at the southern tip of South America. I talked about that before. It's not the southern tip of Africa, but I'll get over it. The takeaway here is corruption and debt led the government to take control of the company's possessions in 1799, creating the Dutch East Indies. So you see a little copycat going on here, right? Your final takeaway from this topic is Britain was the leading economic power throughout the first half of the 19th century. And if you want to check out some of the things I was alluding to, I don't want to get too far down a rabbit hole here, but check out how social Darwinism and its connection to eugenics, and check out what eugenics was, and check out how long it was around. It's really, really scary stuff. All right, this is a big topic, and a lot of these themes, we're gonna have these themes with us the rest of the year. All right, take care. See you in the next one.